The judge's question cut through the courtroom like a blade. You don't remember me, do you? I stood alone at the defense table. My father's house was on the line. Across the aisle, my uncle's expensive lawyer sat with a smug smile, certain he'd already won. Then the judge locked eyes with me again. You were in uniform that night. A chill ran down my spine. I had no idea what she meant. Then she said the name of a small town where I'd been stationed years before. My hands started shaking. She remembered me, but I had no memory of her at all. 3 months earlier, I thought burying my father would be the hardest thing I'd ever do. I was wrong. My father, Daniel, passed away peacefully in his sleep after a long battle with heart disease. He was 64, stubborn, and the kind of man who fixed everything himself. His greatest treasure was never about money. It was the modest 2-story house where he and my mother raised me. It sat on a quiet street in a small Ohio town. The paint was faded. The kitchen hadn't been updated since the 90s. The basement smelled like sawdust because Dad spent half his life repairing furniture down there. But it was home. My mother died 6 years earlier. After that, Dad kept everything exactly as she left it. Her blue coffee mug stayed on the second shelf. Her recipe cards remained beside the fridge. When I was deployed, he'd send me photos of that house during my hardest weeks. Come home, he always wrote. I'll leave the porch light on. His will was simple. The house would go to me. Everything else was divided among the family. My Uncle Richard, Dad's younger brother, received some investments and personal property. He was furious about the house. At first, I thought his anger was just grief. Then the letters started. Richard claimed my father had promised him the property years ago. He said he'd paid for repairs. He said Dad had depended on him. Then, through his lawyer, he filed a formal claim against the estate. I read the complaint and thought there must have been a mistake. My father never told me Richard owned any part of that house. I called several attorneys. The first wanted a retainer I couldn't afford. The second was booked for months. A third warned me the case could get expensive fast. I had savings, but most of it was tied up in my transition out of the military. The court date came faster than I expected, so I walked into court alone. That morning, I wore a dark navy suit instead of my uniform. I carried a folder with every document I'd managed to collect. Across the courtroom, Richard sat beside his polished, confident attorney. Richard looked at me and smiled. Not a warm smile. The kind that said he believed I'd already lost. When the hearing began, his attorney argued first. He claimed Richard had put significant money into the property over the years. Then he produced a document, a supposed agreement signed by my father. I stared at the page. My father's name was at the bottom. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The signature looked right, almost too right. Richard's attorney turned to me. Ms. Morgan, do you have counsel representing you today?
No.
He nodded slowly. I see. Those 2 words burned my cheeks. The judge looked at me. Ms. Morgan, you understand you're representing yourself? Yes, Your Honor. My voice sounded smaller than I wanted. The judge reviewed the document. Then she looked up. Do you have evidence that contradicts this? I opened my folder. Bank statements, tax records, copies of the will, notes. But suddenly, everything looked inadequate. Richard's attorney had professional exhibits and years of experience. I had a folder and a grieving heart. I looked across at my uncle. He didn't look angry anymore. He looked relieved. Then the judge stared at me for several seconds. Her expression changed. Ms. Morgan. I looked up. You don't remember me, do you? The room disappeared. I shook my head. No, Your Honor.
I'm sorry.
I don't. She leaned back. You were in uniform that night. My pulse pounded. What night? She named a town, a highway, a storm. I knew the place. I knew the night. But I still didn't know her. The judge glanced at the file, then back at me. I need to make a disclosure before we continue. Richard's attorney sat straighter. The judge explained she'd encountered me years earlier under unrelated circumstances. She couldn't let that connection affect the case. Then she did something I never expected. She recused herself. Richard's confident expression vanished. Before leaving the bench, The judge looked directly at me. "There is something in this record that deserves a closer look." Then she was gone. I stood frozen. I'd entered that courtroom thinking I'd lose my father's house. I left with no victory, no lawyer, and no idea why a judge from years ago remembered me. But for the first time since Richard filed that lawsuit, I felt something strange. I wasn't walking toward the end of my father's story. I was walking toward the beginning of a truth he'd never gotten to tell me. The town the judge named was Dayton, Ohio. The highway was Route 35. The storm happened 7 years earlier during the worst rain I'd ever seen. I was still in the Army, driving home when the rain became so heavy that headlights looked like blurred stars. Traffic slowed to a crawl. Water ran across the highway. Thunder shook my car. Then I saw the wreck. A sedan had spun across 2 lanes and hit the concrete barrier. Its front end was crushed. Another vehicle had stopped behind it, hazard lights flashing. I pulled over. I grabbed my phone, called 911, and ran through the rain. A woman was trapped inside the sedan. She was conscious, but couldn't move. "Please," she kept saying. "Please don't leave me." "I'm not leaving," I told her. I reached through the broken window and held her hand. She was terrified. I talked to her about ordinary things because I knew panic could make everything worse. I asked her where she lived, if she had children. I told her to keep breathing. Eventually, emergency crews arrived. Firefighters cut through the door. Paramedics stabilized her. Before they took her away, she looked at me. "What's your name?" "Claire." "Claire?" I smiled. "Just Claire." She laughed weakly. Then the ambulance doors closed. I never saw her again, or so I thought. Now, sitting in my car outside the courthouse 7 years later, I remembered her face. And suddenly, I remembered the judge. She wasn't a judge that night. She was the woman trapped in the car. Her name was Evelyn Carter. After the hearing, my phone buzzed. "My uncle. Hope you enjoyed your little performance." Another message. "You should settle while you still can." I turned the phone down. For the first time, I understood something. Richard wasn't worried about losing. He was worried about what I might find if I kept digging. That night, I started doing what I learned in the military when things got confusing. I made a timeline. Every date I could verify. Dad bought the house in 1998. Mom died in 2020. Dad updated his will in 2021. Richard claimed he'd paid for repairs starting in 2019. But the bank records showed something different. Dad had paid the contractors himself. I spread documents across the dining table. Receipts. Bank statements. Property tax bills. Insurance records. Then I found something that made me stop. Richard claimed he'd paid for a new roof in 2019. But the check was from my father's account. I checked another. And another. Nearly every expense Richard claimed as his own had actually been paid by Dad. Why would you lie about this? Then I noticed something else. The disputed agreement was dated March 14, 2021. I knew that date. My father had been in the hospital that week. He'd suffered a cardiac episode and spent 4 days there. I pulled out his medical records. March 14th, hospitalized. Not at home. Not signing property agreements. Not meeting with Richard. My hands went cold. I called an attorney who'd turned me down. When I explained what I found, his tone changed. "Do you have the original document?"
No.
"Only a copy. Get the original if you can. And don't accuse anyone of forgery yet."
Why?
"Because if you're right, the evidence will speak for itself." The next day, I contacted legal aid. They couldn't take the whole case, but an attorney agreed to review some documents. She studied the disputed agreement. She pointed to the signature. "Your father normally signed like this?" "Yes." She compared it with older documents. "It's similar, but similar isn't the same as authentic." She pointed to the date. "Your father's medical records matter here." Then she asked, "Who witnessed this?" I looked at the document. A name was listed. Margaret Lewis. I knew that name. Margaret had worked for Richard's company years ago. The attorney looked at me. "Find her." I found an address and drove there. I sat in my car for 5 minutes before knocking. I wasn't afraid of Margaret. I was afraid of what she might say. If she confirmed the document was real, I could lose the house. If she said it was fake, I'd have to prove it. Either way, the truth was going to hurt. An older woman opened the door. "Can I help you? Are you Margaret Lewis?" "Yes. My name is Claire Morgan. I'm Daniel Morgan's daughter." She stared at me. Then she opened the door wider. "Come in." I placed the disputed agreement on her table. "Where did you get this?" she asked. "My uncle's attorney submitted it in court." Her face went pale. "I was afraid of that." "You recognize it?" She nodded slowly. "I recognize my name." I waited. "Claire, I never witnessed your father signing this document." The room tilted. "Then why is your name on it?" "Richard brought me paperwork at work. He said it was business. I didn't read every page." "Was my father there?"
No.
"Did you see him sign anything?"
No.
"Then why sign as a witness?" She looked down. "Because I trusted Richard." That sentence hurt. My father had trusted his brother too. Margaret told me she left Richard's company months later. She had no idea the document would be used in court. Then she said something that made my stomach tighten. "Richard asked me not to talk about it."
Why?
"He said it would only create problems." I took a breath. "Margaret, my father was in the hospital on that date." Her eyes widened. "Then it couldn't have happened the way this says." She stood and returned with an old notebook. "I used to write down everything work-related."
Dates.
"Meetings." She opened it. March 14th, 2021. I leaned forward.
She turned the notebook toward me.
In blue ink. "Office closed early. Richard left around 3 o'clock. No meeting with Daniel." I stared at the page. For the first time, I had more than suspicion. I had a witness. She agreed to speak with my attorney. Before I left, she looked at me. "I'm sorry, Claire." "For what?" "For not asking questions sooner." On the drive home, I kept thinking about those words. Maybe that's how family betrayals happen. Not in one big moment. Through years of silence and people convincing themselves something wasn't their problem. When I got home, a message from Richard. "Stop digging." I saved it. The next morning, I told the attorney what Margaret said. She reviewed everything. "This is significant," she said. "But can we prove the document is fake?" "Not yet. But we may be able to show it couldn't have been executed when they claim." She explained we needed authentication. Records showing where my father was, where the notary was, whether Margaret actually witnessed anything. I nodded. "Then let's find those records." That afternoon, I requested more property records. The disputed agreement had supposedly been notarized by a man named Thomas Bell. He was still a licensed notary. I contacted him. He refused to discuss it without authorization but agreed to preserve his records. 2 days later, my attorney called. "Claire, we found something. The notary journal doesn't match your uncle's document." I sat down. "What does that mean?" "It means we need to look closely at how this agreement was created. And the witness signature may not match Margaret's original signature from that period." I closed my eyes. For the first time, I could see a path forward. But Richard's attorney filed another motion. He argued I was harassing family and manufacturing evidence. Richard wanted the court to dismiss my objections. He was desperate. At the hearing, his attorney looked at me. "You're chasing ghosts, Ms. Morgan." I said nothing. "You're going to have to prove all of this." I looked down at my folder. For the first time, I smiled. Because I understood something. I didn't need to convince them. I needed to prove it. And somewhere in a notary's old journal was the piece of truth my uncle had forgotten to erase. The notary journal changed everything. My attorney reviewed it and called me in. "The agreement says your father signed on March 14th, 2021. The notary's journal shows notarization that day. But the entries around that date are clear. No Daniel Morgan. No property transfer. No signature matching the agreement." She handed me a photocopy. "There's more. The notary recorded his office was closed that afternoon because of a family emergency. The supposed agreement was notarized at 4:15 p.m. That's impossible. My father was in the hospital. The witness hadn't seen him sign. The notary's own records proved the notarization couldn't have happened. And yet Richard presented that document in court like it was legitimate. I felt anger rising. My attorney noticed. Don't confront him.
Why?
Because right now you have evidence. That's better than an argument. She was right. But I couldn't stop thinking about who had done this. Richard wasn't a stranger. He was my father's younger brother. He'd eaten at our table. He'd helped Dad fix the fence after Mom died. He stood beside me at her funeral. How could someone with so many shared memories try to steal my father's last gift to me? That evening, I went back to Dad's house. I opened every drawer.
He was always organized.
Receipts in labeled folders. Notes in spiral notebooks. After hours, I found a locked metal box. I found the key. Inside were photographs, old bank statements, insurance papers, handwritten letters. At the bottom, an envelope with my name. Dad's handwriting. My girl, if you're reading this, something happened I hope never would. I know your uncle has asked about the house. I've told him no more than once. Richard believes I owe him. He helped me during difficult years.
He did.
But helping someone doesn't give them ownership of what belongs to someone else. I swallowed hard. Your mother wanted this house to remain a place where our family could always come home. If Richard challenges the will, don't fight him because you hate him. Fight him because I made a promise to your mother. I pressed the letter to my chest. For years, I thought Dad just wanted me to inherit a house. Now I understood. He wanted me to protect a memory. There was one more item. A USB drive. Dad never liked technology. Why would he leave me this? I took it to my laptop. 3 files. Photographs. An old will. And an audio recording. I clicked it. Static. Then Dad's voice. If you're hearing this, Claire, I'm sorry. I didn't want to involve you. A pause. Then another voice. Richard. You're making this harder than it needs to be, Daniel. No. I'm making it clear. You don't need that house. Claire does. Richard laughed. You're leaving everything to a daughter who barely comes home? Dad's voice hardened. She serves this country. Don't mistake distance for abandonment. Silence. Then Richard. What if she doesn't come back? Dad answered immediately. Then the house stays hers anyway. The recording continued. Richard begged, argued, said he was in financial trouble. Dad refused. Finally, if anything happens to me, Claire gets the house. There will be no confusion. The recording ended. I sat alone in the dark. I listened again, and again. Then I understood. Richard wasn't trying to inherit something. He was trying to erase my father's final decision. The next morning, I gave the recording to my attorney. She listened carefully. This could be very important. Can we use it? We'll need to authenticate it. But yes.
Then she looked at me.
If your uncle knew your father documented this conversation, he'd have a reason to create another document that appeared to override the will. The pieces fit. The fake agreement was created to contradict Dad's actual wishes. But one question remained. Why did the original judge recognize me? I received a formal notice from the court. Judge Evelyn Carter had disclosed our prior encounter and provided the emergency report from 7 years ago. I read it. Then I saw something I'd forgotten. The report listed another person at the accident scene. Richard Morgan. My uncle. Why was he there that night? And why did the judge remember me, but not mention him? I called my attorney. My uncle was at that accident scene. She paused. Then we need to find out exactly why. I looked at my father's letter. For the first time, I understood. The courtroom battle might not have begun with the house. The house might have been the last piece of a much older story. The hearing began on a gray Tuesday. By then, I'd stopped feeling afraid. Not because I was confident, because I finally understood what Dad taught me without saying it. When the truth is on your side, you don't have to make it louder. You just have to make it impossible to ignore. I walked into court with my folder. Thicker now. Inside. The will, medical records, bank statements, property records, Margaret's statement, the notary records, and the audio recording. My attorney sat beside me. Across the aisle, Richard and his lawyer. His lawyer looked confident. Richard didn't. He kept staring at my folder. The hearing began. Richard's attorney argued first. He claimed the disputed agreement showed Dad's intent to transfer the property. He described my objections as a grieving daughter's misunderstanding. Your Honor, Ms. Morgan appears determined to turn a simple property dispute into an accusation against her own family. My attorney leaned toward me. Don't react. The judge turned to me. Ms. Morgan, you may respond. I stood. My objection isn't based on what I believe my father wanted. It's based on what the documents show. I handed the clerk the first exhibit. My father's medical records show he was hospitalized on the date this agreement was supposedly signed. Richard shifted. His attorney objected. The judge reviewed the records. Objection noted. Continue. I handed over the next document. The notary's official journal shows the notarization listed on this agreement did not occur. Richard's attorney stood. Your Honor, we dispute the interpretation. The judge looked at him, then explained the discrepancy. He paused. For the first time, uncertainty crossed his face. Then Margaret took the stand. She confirmed Richard gave her paperwork to sign years ago. She never saw my father sign the disputed agreement. She'd never met my father that day. The attorney asked, "Are you certain the signature on this document is yours?" Margaret looked at the paper. Yes. But I did not sign it as a witness to Daniel Morgan's signature. The attorney's smile vanished. Isn't it possible you simply don't remember? Margaret looked directly at him. I may forget where I left my glasses. I don't forget witnessing a man sign away his house. The judge asked for the notary records. Then my attorney stood. We have one additional exhibit. She submitted the audio recording. Richard's face changed. He recognized it. The recording played in open court. Dad's voice. If anything happens to me, Claire gets the house. There will be no confusion. Richard's voice. You're going to leave everything to a daughter who barely comes home? Dad's answer. She serves this country. Don't mistake distance for abandonment. Richard stared at the floor. When it ended, the courtroom was silent. Richard's attorney stood slowly. Your Honor, we request time to challenge the authenticity. The judge agreed. Authentication would be required. But my attorney was prepared. The original device was preserved. The metadata could be examined. Then the judge asked Richard directly, do you dispute the voices are yours and Daniel's? Richard's attorney leaned toward him. Richard swallowed. No, he said quietly. The judge looked at him. You do not dispute the conversation occurred? Richard closed his eyes. No. His attorney shot him a sharp look. Richard continued. I just didn't think she'd find it. My heart sank. Not because I'd won. Because I finally understood how far he'd gone. The judge asked for clarification. Richard's attorney requested a recess. During the break, Richard approached me. His face looked older. You don't understand, he whispered. I understand enough. I was going to lose everything. You were trying to take Dad's house. I thought he owed me. He didn't. Richard looked away. I helped him. And he thanked you. That wasn't enough. His voice cracked. I realized then it wasn't really about the house. It was about resentment. Richard believed my father got the better life. He saw the house as proof Daniel chose me over him. But Dad hadn't chosen between brothers. He'd made a decision about his own property. Several weeks later, the final hearing took place. The notary confirmed his journal had no record of the transaction. Margaret confirmed her testimony. The medical records established Dad's hospitalization. The audio was authenticated. Property records showed Richard hadn't made the payments he claimed. Piece by piece, Richard's story collapsed. The judge ruled. The disputed agreement was rejected. Richard's claim was denied. The house remained with the estate and passed to me. I sat still. I didn't cheer. I didn't smile. I just closed my eyes. My father had won. Not because I defeated Richard. Because the truth survived him. Outside the courthouse, Richard stopped me. I'm sorry. He was crying. I know that doesn't fix anything. No, I said. It doesn't. He nodded. Can I see the house one more time? I looked at him. Winning the case had been the easy part. What I chose to do next would tell me who I really was. For months, I'd imagined this moment. Him, angry. Me telling him exactly what I thought. walking away while he finally understood loss. But when he stood there with tears in his eyes, I didn't feel victorious. I felt tired. Yes, I said. We drove separately. When I unlocked the door, Richard stopped behind me. He just stared at the hallway. Your dad painted that himself. I know. He smiled faintly. He hated that color. I almost laughed. He chose it. I know, Richard said. That's why I teased him. We walked through the living room. Everything was the same. Mom's photograph on the mantel. Dad's recliner by the window. His tools in the basement. Richard stopped at one photograph. Dad and Richard as young men standing beside their first car.
Happy.
I'd seen that picture 100 times. But that day, I saw something different. Two brothers who'd once loved each other before money and resentment got in the way. Richard touched the frame. He was always better at everything. That isn't true. It felt true. He sat down. When your dad bought this house, I was struggling. When he started his business, I was still trying to figure out mine. When Mom died, he was the one everyone depended on. He looked at me. And then you came home in that uniform, and he looked at you like you were the greatest thing he'd ever done. I didn't answer. Richard wiped his eyes. I thought this house was the last thing I could take from him. That wasn't the house talking, I said. That was your anger. He nodded. I know. Then he said, I lied. I know. No, I mean about everything. He admitted he'd exaggerated what he'd contributed. He convinced himself that because he helped Dad, he deserved the house. When Dad refused, Richard became bitter. He pressured someone to help prepare paperwork to make his claims stronger. He didn't excuse it. He knew there could be consequences. I listened. Part of me wanted him to face every consequence. Another part remembered Dad's voice. Don't fight him because you hate him. Dad never asked me to protect Richard. He asked me not to become cruel. Richard, I can't pretend this didn't happen. You hurt me. You tried to take the last thing Dad left me. He looked down. But I don't want to spend the rest of my life hating you. He looked up. I saw genuine relief in his face. Not forgiveness. Not yet. Just the possibility. I told him forgiveness required accountability. He'd have to cooperate with any legal process. He agreed. He also agreed to repay debts and stop making claims. We didn't hug.
Some wounds need time.
But when he left, he paused at the door. Your dad would be proud of you. I looked at the porch light. The same light he left on whenever I was away. I hope so. After Richard left, I stood alone in the kitchen. For the first time, the house didn't feel like evidence. It felt like home. Weeks later, I received a letter from Judge Evelyn Carter. She wrote about the night we met. She remembered being terrified and hearing a young woman tell her, I'm not leaving. She hadn't known my last name or where I lived. But she remembered my face. She'd never forgotten what it felt like to be helpless and have a stranger refuse to leave. She explained that when she recognized me in court, she knew she couldn't continue as judge. She recused herself because justice had to be fair. She hadn't helped me win. She'd simply recognized me. That distinction mattered. I folded the letter and placed it beside Dad's. Two people from different moments reminded me of the same lesson. Character isn't what you do when everyone watches. It's what you do when no one can reward you for it. I repaired the house. I kept Mom's coffee mug, Dad's workbench, even the ugly paint color he loved. But I made one change. I put a small table on the front porch, a place where family could sit, talk, and remember the house was never about money. It was about belonging. I learned something practical too. If you have a will, keep it current. Keep property records, financial documents, and important communications organized. Don't assume family will agree after you're gone. If you're in a dispute, don't wait. Seek legal help. If you can't afford it, find legal aid. Representing yourself is possible. But complex cases can be overwhelming. I learned that the hard way. I walked into court without a lawyer, thinking I had no chance. It didn't mean that. But courage doesn't mean refusing help. Sometimes courage means admitting you need it. I thought I wanted revenge. I wanted Richard to feel the same pain he caused me. But when it was over, I realized revenge would have given me another victory to celebrate. Justice gave me something better. It gave me the truth. Forgiveness gave me the chance to stop carrying the weight of what my uncle had done. I still remember that courtroom, sitting alone, his attorney smiling, thinking I'd lose everything. And most of all, the judge looking at me and asking, "You don't remember me, do you?" For years, I thought that question changed my life because she recognized me. Now I know it changed my life because it reminded me who I wanted to be. Dad didn't leave me a house, so I could win a war against my family. He left it because he trusted me to protect what mattered without destroying myself. And maybe that's the greatest inheritance any parent can leave. Not money or property. A lesson about who you become when life gives you every reason to be bitter. If this story reminded you of someone, think about what you'd protect, what you'd forgive, and what you'd never compromise. If you believe someone else needs this reminder, share it with them. If you enjoy stories about courage, family, and second chances, like this video and subscribe to Zarabell Stories for more. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't making someone pay. Sometimes it's walking away with your heart still intact.